Welcome to Vivaswan Educational Foundation, your gateway to success. Explore classes in UPSC, Defense, WBCS, Combined Course, CAT, CLAT, and many more. Subscribe now for expert guidance and quality education.
Hello everyone, welcome to Bibaswan Educational Foundation, your one-stop solution for preparing for the UPSC Civil Services Examination. In this video, we are going to understand the UPSC Civil Services Examination's syllabus and bust a few myths about the examination. Now, there are a few myths that needs to be shattered about this examination that we generally hear from our friends, peers, colleagues, or even on the internet. Now, the first myth that is out there is that it is the most difficult examination in the world. This is incorrect. It is not the world's most difficult examination because, one, it has a set defined syllabus and there is a pattern to the examination. Also, it might be that people think it is the most difficult examination in the world because of the number of people who go apply for the examination and the number of people who go and clear the examination. Now, as per the past data, approximately 10 or so lakh people just apply for the examination, right? And out of the people who apply for this examination, it might become out as very strange, but the fact of the matter is around 4.5 to 5 lakh out of 10 lakhs go and sit for the examination. So there is a 50% turnout to ratio. And out of the 50%, that is, in this case, if we are assuming 5 lakh aspirants who are appearing for this examination at the center, say not more than 20% of the candidates have read their materials. And by reading, I just mean reading. And the number of candidates who are all the more serious really does not exceed more than 50,000. And it is this 50,000 you have to compete and be among the top 1,000 or so, because if one year you have got 1,000 vacancies, you just need to go and find your name and your roll number in that hallowed PDF. Okay, that's point number one. Point number two, everything can be asked under the sun. This is absolutely bogus. This is incorrect. Why? Because one, we have a syllabus. A syllabus is a document that goes and defines the boundary from of the topics from where questions will be asked. Point number one. Point number two, we have access to the previous year question papers. And if you see the previous year question paper, there are a lot of topics that can be regarded as a favorite topic of the commission. And it is those topics that you need to be really thorough in, and also practice a lot of questions that goes and are based around that very topic. And that is something that is very obvious, yet people do not know about it because they do not go and read the syllabus thoroughly. Read and understand the syllabus thoroughly. The third myth that again we come across is that you need to study 12 to 14 hours a day to clear this examination. Let me tell you, this is nonsense. Why? See, say for instance, we have 365 days in a year. Now, if a person goes and just studies for 12 to 14 hours a day, it's just humanly impossible because there will be ups and there will be downs. What matters more, and honestly, what matters most is the efficiency and what you have done in those time. Productivity matters more than just devoting a set specific hours of a day for preparing for not just this examination, for any examination. Okay, now let us look at the syllabus of the examination. Now, as you all mostly know, that the UPSC Civil Services Examination is divided into three parts. The first being the preliminary stage, and the second being the main examination, and the final being the interview or the personality test. Now, this is the syllabus for the UPSC Civil Services Examinations General Studies Paper 1. The first topic that is mentioned in the syllabus for the prelims seems to be very vast, which is, it says current events of national and international importance. This is basically our current affairs. This is the current affairs section that we often hear people say is very important for preparing this examination, also clearing this examination, of course, for which people again recommend newspapers, and we have something called monthly magazines. and we have something called yearly compilations, right? So there's a lot of things that go around with this, and there's a lot of debate that goes around. What is there? Should we do all of them to go and clear this examination? Or we'll think about this later on. But now let's go and just focus on whatever is written out here. Okay, what the specific topics are. So as I said, this is basically our current affair. This is the current affairs aspect of the examination. Point number 2 talks about the history of India and Indian national movement. Now, this is a very vast topic in it itself because it talks about history of India. These three words basically encompasses our ancient history. You can say it from the and our medieval history, and also our Indian national movement. That broadly people categorize as modern history, and also post-independence India. So it starts all the way from our Indus Valley civilization till say post-independence India and beyond. Or rather, this goes and culminates into current affairs. So this thing is very vast. Okay. Anyway, this is there, and the third section talks about Indian and world geography. Out here, one needs to know about the physical geography. There's something called social geography, economic geography of India and the world, what's happening around the world. Okay, so you have got geomorphology, climatology, oceanography out here just in this physical geography section of it. In economic geography, one might go ahead and even link it with agriculture. Say, for example, the idea of and the debates going around with the minimum support prices and all the more. There's a lot of things that goes around out here, right? So this is the geography aspect. Then the fourth topic out here that speaks about Indian polity and governance. Of course, the Constitution is the primary document that we need to focus on. In fact, the most important document for this entire examination. And then we have to go and understand the political system in India, which goes and talks about our, say, the prime ministerial, who is the prime ministerial form of governance, what is a parliamentary form of governance, what is a presidential form of governance, and how the political system is based on. Like, for instance, our Lok Sabha, the Rajya Sabha, and the president, all which constitutes the Parliament of India. Then we have got something called the state legislatures. Then we have got something called local bodies, say, for example, the Panchayati Raj and the municipalities. All these are up, right? Which is also mentioned out here if you read very carefully. Then we have got something that we need to read something about what public policy, what bureaucracy is about and all. Then we have to go and think about certain rights, acts, and what are the issues that we face, right? This is the fourth topic. Now let's go to the fifth topic, which goes and talks about the economic and social development aspect. This is something that people broadly classify as economy, or rather Indian economy. This is the Indian economy aspect of the syllabus, which goes and talks about the sustainable development goals, about poverty, about inclusion, about demographics of India, and what are the social sector initiatives by the governments. This is the fifth topic, right? This is the sixth topic, which again, as you can read out here, it just goes and talks about that we need to be aware about the general issues on environmental ecology, biodiversity, and climate change, which does not require any subject specialization. This is basically the environment aspect of the syllabus, what you might have colloquially heard. This is the environment section of the examination. And then there's something called general science. Okay, this is basically what the UPSC Prelims paper goes and talks about. Out here, there are certain words that you might find a little too broad and vague. For instance, as I said you, the second topic itself goes and talks about history of India and Indian national movement. There is so much to study in the history of India that it becomes a little too overwhelming if you just go and think about it, right? So how do we go and narrow down what are the important topics? For this, we can go and look at the main syllabus, because we'll go through the main syllabus, and then you will realize, if you keep the prelim syllabus in mind, that the main syllabus is just an extension of the prelims syllabus. So let's go and see. This is the syllabus of the mains paper. This is the first paper that you'll be sitting for when you'll be clearing the prelims examination, and it is the GS paper 1, as people colloquially call it. This consists of Indian heritage and culture, history, geography of the world, and society. So as you can see out here, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 topics that one needs to be thorough with. Okay, So now let's look at the syllabus in depth. Out here, the first topic is about Indian culture, and it says that Indian culture will cover the salient aspects of point number one, art form, point number two, literature, point number three, architecture, from ancient to modern times. Now, if we go back in the previous slide, out here in the history of India's section, there is something called art and culture. And out here in this art and culture section, we get questions that goes and talks about art forms. Then we also get a lot of questions on literature. For example, we have had questions that has been asked on Sangam literature and many more. And then we also get questions on architectures, be it the Chaityas or many more. So if you go and see the previous year questions that have been asked from the history of India, it also includes art and culture as a section from which you get questions on the art forms, literature and architecture. So now you see how the mains examinations syllabus goes and gives us a much more narrow and specific topics that we need to really focus on if we want to go and even prepare for the prelims examination. So out here, again, coming back to this slide, these things are very important. So this is basically our art and culture topic that one also prepares for the prelims examination, but these are the aspects that one really needs to focus on. And it is pretty self-explanatory. Now, the second topic is about modern Indian history. And remember in the first slide that we had gone through that we had to go and study about the history of India and Indian national movement. Now this becomes more specific because out here it goes and talks that one, we need to only study modern Indian history. Of course, this is from the mains perspective where we have to go and write descriptive answers, and for which we need to go and study from the middle of the 18th century, which goes and starts from the decline of the Mughal Empire until the present times. Out here, we need to know about significant events, significant personalities, and significant issues. Say, for instance, if we have had questions on Gandhi, Ambedkar, Nehru, and a lot more, right? So all these, if you think about it, these are the questions that are asked from our significant personalities type. And of course, regarding events, say for example, the unfortunate Jallianwala Bagh tragedy, this becomes an important an important topic that one really needs to go and study about. Then we have got something called this freedom struggle. Of course, the freedom struggle is an extension of modern Indian history. And we have had significant personalities that fought for the freedom struggle of the country. For example, Gandhi, Ambedkar, Nehru, and many more. So all this also becomes an extension of the very same syllabus. Now we have to go and study about its various stages, be it the moderates, and then we had the extremists and all more. And here it also goes and extends about the very same topic of significant personalities as important contributions from different parts of the country by different people, of course. And then there is something called post-independence consolidation and reorganization within the country. Because when India got independent, so we had a lot of problem about, or rather issues about the idea of princely states and their mergers, which was done by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, the Iron Man of India. So we need to go and study post-independence in that sense. And then we also need to go and study about reorganization within the country. And we have had questions that have been asked from this, descriptive type questions. Although keep in mind that we have had not so many questions that have been asked from this section, but nevertheless, it becomes an important topic. There's no topic that one should miss. Now, this is the fifth topic that is mentioned in the first paper of the mains examination, history of the world. Now, honestly, you don't get a lot of questions from this topic. However, again, just like what I said about the post-independence consolidation and reorganization within the country topic, this should also not be missed. However, you can keep the priority of this pretty low, and you should go and prioritize Indian heritage and culture, history and geography, and society even higher than this. But nevertheless, this is not a big topic per se, because and there are very specific topics that have been mentioned up here. Say, for example, the Industrial Revolution. Then we have had questions on world wars. Then we have had questions on redrawal of national boundaries, colonialization, decolonialization, political philosophies, like for instance, communism, capitalism, socialism, and their form and effects in the society. Out here, if you go and if you observe the previous year question paper, you have had questions on not just the industrial revolution, but whatever revolutions, watershed moments that the world has faced. For example, be it the American Revolution, be it the French Revolution, or be it the Russian Revolution. So these are also certain topics that one needs to go and read up. Okay. Then we have been asked questions from the salient features of Indian society, diversity of India. Now, this section that is in red, this is basically our Indian society section. And out here, the subtopics of this specific topic that is there in the heading that you can see out here is very well written, which means that you just need to go and focus on these specific topics and have maybe 2 or at max 3 pages of notes on these very topics, and that will be more than sufficient for you to go and do this paper pretty well. That the first topic that is mentioned out here is basically salient features of Indian society and diversity of India. So, for instance, India has a lot of people from various castes, creed. We have got multiple languages and there are multiple cuisines, and there are problems with such a diversity in India, and it is also a blessing for India. So that's there. So if one can just go and procure notes for this topic and study it in a very holistic manner, one will be able to go sail through this topic. Okay, and this topic out here, role of women and women's organization. This is a very, very important topic because if you open the UPSC syllabus, or rather the prospectus that is issued by the UPSC, on every page, you will find that UPSC goes and stresses for a much more gender inclusive workforce, and women candidates are encouraged to apply for the examination. It's written up there. So study this in a very holistic manner and study it very carefully. There is this another topic of population and their associated issues. Of course, one needs to go and have maybe 2 pages of notes for this, and one can go and link it with one of the features of Indian society also. And the question of India's population can also be linked with poverty, and which is again a very pressing issue of the country. And the other topic is about the developmental issues regarding a lot of issues arising out of, say, for instance, urbanization and rural issues. Say, for instance, even the problems of communalism, as you can see it in the fourth topic out here, how it goes, and it can go and fuel poverty. You can go ahead and link so many sections of this specific subject, that is society, that you can have a very holistic study of this. For instance, globalization. One can go ahead and link it with poverty, the increase in poverty post 1991 economic reforms in India. We have got something called, okay, let's go and see about other topics. We have got one topic on effect of globalization on Indian society. This primarily talks about the effect of the 1991 LPG reforms, that is the liberalization, privatization and globalization reforms that were initiated in India. So why we had to do it, what were its issues that we had to face, and what were the benefits that we had to face, and what is the way forward, what are we thinking right now. So this is there. Then we have got something called social empowerment of various sections, be it the women, be it the minorities, and be it even a regional development and regional social empowerment, be it even the elderly section, be it the young children. So this all can come under that section. Then there are these topics of communalism, regionalism, and secularism that one needs to go and study very carefully, right? So basically, Indian society as a topic is very vast, but it's very interesting and it's very easy because we live in a society. We are aware of certain things, problems, issues that the society faces, and we might have some way forwards or solutions that we think and that can be implemented. So it's not very difficult and it's a very interesting topic, right? And this is our Indian society. The second topic out here is the geography section. Coming back to the first slide, remember we had mentioned about Indian and world geography as a topic in the prelims paper that goes and encompasses physical, social, and economic geography of India and the world. This section is a little more elaborate, and we're going to use the syllabus to understand what are the things that could be potentially asked. The first one being the salient features of the world's physical geography. The second being distribution of key natural resources across the world. That includes South Asia and the Indian subcontinent. We have had questions in our prelims examination that went and talked about the certain issues that South Asia faces. For instance, cyclones. Because geography and geographical features, say for instance mountains and oceans, they do not go and encompass political boundaries per se. So one needs to go and have some idea about, say for instance, the Indian Ocean region, from which we do get a lot of questions because this also is prone to a lot of cyclones and such natural disasters. So this is out here that one needs to really go and focus on this entire area of South Asia. Okay, coming back, the topic goes and talks about distribution of key natural resources across the world, factors responsible for the location of primary, secondary, and tertiary sector industries in various parts of the world. The third topic within the geography section talks about important geophysical phenomena such as earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic activities, and cyclones. So this out here can also be linked with disaster management. Keep a note of this, right? Okay, now we can go and look at other topics, say for instance, geographical features and their locations. Changes in critical geographical features, including water bodies and ice caps, because of, yes, global warming, and in flora and fauna and their effect of such change. Now, if you go and look at this word effect out here, effect of such changes, it results in global warming. And what is global warming? What does it do? It is a disaster. So these topics should be studied very carefully, and we do get a lot of questions from this. And now, if you really think about it, this disaster that is out here, it can just go ahead and you can link it with the Indian society section of the topic that goes and mentions about poverty and developmental issues, right? So all these are interlinked if you really think about it. Of course, because of this disaster, you can go and urbanization out here, even this as a topic goes and has an effect, directly affects global warming. Right? So all these topics are actually very carefully and very closely linked. Now, the second paper of our UPSC Civil Services Mains examination is the General Studies Paper 2, which goes and talks about topics of governance, constitution, polity, social justice, and international relations. Let's look at the subtopics that are mentioned out here. The first thing is the Indian Constitution. Of course, the most important document that you'll be reading and studying for this examination. Now, the Indian Constitution is influenced by multiple documents. The most important document out here being the Government of India's Act 1935. And out here, when it goes and talks about historical underpinning, it is basically the Government of India's Act 1935 that needs to be studied very carefully, because the Indian Constitution's framework is broadly based in the Government of India's Act of 1935, right? Okay. Then we have to go and study about the evolution of the Constitution. What are the features of the Constitution? What are the important amendments that were made in the Constitution? Say, for instance, the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act, and also the recent amendments. We need to know about significant provisions and also the idea of the basic structure, which was mentioned in the most famous Ananda Bharti case of 1973. Now, the second subtopic goes and talks about functions and responsibilities of the Union and the states. This talks about the federal structure of the Constitution. And this you can also link it because it is a feature of the Constitution, right? So this out here, the idea of the features of the Indian Constitution can be linked with the functions and responsibilities of the Union and states, which is written explicitly in the 7th schedule of the Indian Constitution. We also need to know about the issues and challenges that are pertaining to the federal structure. What does devolution of power mean, and what are the financial issues that governing bodies up to the local levels face, which is mentioned out here, right? So this is something that one needs to be very careful and study very carefully and in depth about. The third topic out here goes and talks about separation of powers. Separation of powers between various organs, dispute resolution mechanisms, and institutions. Article 50 of the Constitution says that there should be a separation of powers between the executive and the judiciary. This separation of power, the Supreme Court has held in one of its judgment, is a basic feature of the Indian Constitution. So, when you're going and studying these topics, always ensure that you study these topics in a very holistic manner where you can do some interlinkages out here. These interlinkages will go and only make your understanding of the very topics that you study even better. So please go ahead and do that when you're preparing for this examination. Now let us look at the fourth subtopic that is written out here. It's a very simple topic that goes and says that there will be question asked about comparing the Indian constitutional scheme with that of other countries. Say for instance, we have had questions of comparing the Indian constitution with that of the American constitution. There are questions that we have been asked where we have to go and compare the Indian constitution with that of the French constitution, and so on and so forth. So this is out there. It's a very easy topic anyway. So we can move on to the next one. Now out here, we need to know and understand the structure of the parliament and the state legislatures, as mentioned out here. Structure, its functioning, how businesses is conducted out here, what are the powers and privileges, and what are the issues that arise out of these. Now we can go and see the other topic being the structure, organization, and function of the executive and the judiciary, with the ministries and departments of the government, what are pressure groups and formal and informal association and the ruling polity, how they go and affect the polity of the country. Now out here there is a specific act that is written out here explicitly, that is the Representations of the People's Act. Out here, if you go through the previous year question paper, you'll see that a lot of questions from this act is based basically on the disqualification of the members of the houses, be it the Lok Sabha or the Rajya Sabha or the Assembly. This questions about disqualification is a very favorite topic of the commission, because from the Representations of People's Act, which is a very huge act, you generally get questions on basically the disqualification that people face and the issues, and who is the person who goes and disqualifies, is there any time limit or not. So this act should be read very carefully. Now the fourth topic out here talks about appointment to various constitutional posts. Of course, out here, because the going through the previous year question paper, you will go and understand that the CAG and the office of the governor becomes very important, because these are very important constitutional posts. What are the powers, functions, and responsibilities of various constitutional bodies? There are specific constitutional bodies, like for even the Attorney General for India, be it the high courts, and so on and so forth. So there are very few but specific constitutional posts that is mentioned in the constitution that one needs to be very well read about them, because questions are asked from this section. Then the other topic goes and talks about statutory, regulatory, and various judicial bodies. Say for instance, when we talk about the regulatory bodies, for the stock market we have the SEBI. For the insurance sector, we have the IRDAI. For banks, we of course have the Reserve Bank of India. So these regulatory bodies, and of course for the telecom sector, we have the TRAI, Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. These are just few regulatory bodies out here. There are more regulatory bodies that one needs to go and read about. But say, for instance, from this subtopic of regulatory bodies, I could just go ahead and talk about few of them. And these are the bodies that one should study, and whatever other bodies that might be there. And one will be able to cover this topic very efficiently if one goes and makes 2 or 3 pages of notes from them. Now, out here in this slide, we can see that it is mentioned about government policies and interventions for development in various sectors and issues rising out of the design and implementation. This is basically our governance section, and governance goes and has with it the ideas of policy development and intervention that is made by the government for, of course, development in various sectors. So one needs to study this very carefully and in a very holistic manner. Now, of course, governance also includes the role of NGOs, SHGs, and many various groups, pressure groups, and associations. What are the role of donors, charities, and what about the other institutional and other stakeholders that have a role in governance? The third topic that is mentioned out here talks about the welfare schemes for vulnerable sections of the population by the center and the states and the performance of these schemes. Out here, the questions of vulnerable sections might arise. Who are the vulnerable sections? It's very easy. Vulnerable sections includes but are not just limited to women, transgenders, children, the elderly, minorities, and more. What are the mechanisms, laws, institutions, and bodies constituted for the protection and betterment of these vulnerable sections? So one needs to go and study these very carefully. Now, the fourth topic out here in this slide goes and talks about issues relating to development and management of social sector slash services relating to health, education, and human resources. These three topics, health, education, and human resources, must be studied very carefully. Also, these topics can go and give you further material for your essay paper. And also, if you really think about it, health, education, and human resources can be linked with Indian society, and topics that you study out there can be used in for the mains examination, also in this section of the mains examination, and vice versa. So study this very carefully. Okay, the final topic in this slide goes and talks about issues related to poverty and hunger. If you recall, in the first paper that we saw, the General Studies paper 1, we had a topic on poverty and associated issues. And in the second paper, there is this question, this topic on issues relating to poverty and hunger. So study this topic very carefully, and you will get further material from the first paper of the GS of the mains examination, that is the GS paper 1, to go and substantiate the point that is out here. Now, in this slide, we can see this section out here. Important aspect of governance, transparency, and accountability. What is e-governance out here? What are the applications of e-governance? What are the models of e-governance? What are the successes of it, the limitations that e-governance faces, and its potential in? The importance of citizens' charter, the importance of transparency and accountability in governance, and institutional and other measures. So this is also a pretty important topic that one has to go and study. Out here, one can see this specific topic, role of civil services in a democracy, what civil services does and how it goes and facilitates implementation of policies. Now, this section is basically the international relations section of the mains syllabus, and this talks about India and its neighboring relations. Say, for instance, we have our neighboring countries, neighboring regional groupings, and issues that we face with the multiple countries that we share borders with, and the issues that we share with regional grouping. This becomes very important. What are the bilateral, regional, and global groupings and agreements involving India's or affecting India's interest? Say, for instance, the BRICS, the SCO, and so on and so forth. These becomes very important. Of course, also the United Nations. The other topic goes and talks about effects of policies and politics of developed and developing countries on India's interests and Indian diaspora. Because out here, India's diaspora has an element of soft power that can go and aid in having good relationship with our neighboring countries, and also the pressure groups that we can have in uh, multiple countries that can aid in multiple global groupings, say for instance the SCO or the BRICS. So this topic should be very carefully read and linked with what the Indian diaspora, say for example, can go and accelerate India's interest in the global order. The next topic goes and talks about important international institutions, as mentioned before, of course, the United Nations, of course, the International Court of Justice, and many more. What are the intergovernmental agencies and forum, their structure, and their mandate? So, this is the international relations section of our mains syllabus. Now, let us look at the third paper of the UPSC mains examination. The third paper out here goes and talks about topics of technology, which people colloquially call it science and tech, economic development, which people generally call Indian economy, biodiversity and environment, security, which people colloquially call internal security, and disaster management. Okay, so the first subheading in detail talks about Indian economy and issues related to planning, mobilization of resources, growth, development, and employment. Out here, topics, say for instance, planning goes and talks about what we erstwhile had the Planning Commission, which is now replaced with the Niti Aayog, and what Niti Aayog helps in giving policy advices to our government, and if they go ahead and implement it, what are the implementations that it does, and how it goes and assists even the states in implementing that plan. Mobilization of resources, because there's always this question about growth versus development. What is growth? What is development? And what are the problems that we face when we just go and focus on growth without having any development? Which is the second topic that is mentioned out here: inclusive growth and issues arising from it. Tries to go ahead and tackle growth, development, and employment. What are the issues of employment, and what are the issues relating to, say for instance, wages, be it the rights of employees, what about the social security of them, and many more. The second subtopic, as we had just mentioned about, talks about inclusive growth and issues arising from it. The third topic goes and talks about government budgeting. Now, this is basically the budget of India. And one day before the budget, there is something called the economic survey that is presented by the government. So these two documents should be studied very carefully, because every year one gets questions from these, and the topics and facts that one gets from these documents can help us immensely to go and substantiate answers, not just for the general studies paper 3 subtopic economy, but also for, say for instance, subtopics that we find in general studies paper 1's society, and even general study paper 2's governance and social justice. Remember the topic of poverty and developmental issues. One can go and get further material, facts, figures, data, committee recommendations from these specific documents. So these documents should be studied very carefully when they come out. This section out here talks about agriculture as a topic. Now, if you see out here, the topic of agriculture is not really explicitly written out here. However, I believe, and it is pretty evident because of the subtopics that is mentioned out here, that agriculture should be studied very carefully. Why? Agriculture has direct correlation with inclusive growth and issues arising with it, and employment, because agriculture goes and gives employment to approximately half of the country's population. So this topic should be studied very carefully, and there are subtopics that are mentioned in detail. So one should go ahead and study it. The first subtopic goes and talks about major cropping patterns in various parts of the country. Pretty self-explanatory. Different types of irrigation and irrigation system storage, transportation, and marketing of agriculture produce, and issues and related constraints. Out here, say for instance, one can go ahead and even link technological aspect with that of irrigation. How? There is something called micro irrigation. Now, I'm just writing these topics out here so that you get some broad aspect about how broad the UPSC syllabus is, and how you can do some sort of interlinkages to go and have a very holistic understanding of the mains syllabus. Now, let us look at the second topic, which goes and talks about issues relating to direct and indirect farm subsidies and minimum support prices. This out here is a bone of contention because this is something that India faces. There are many debates that goes around with the idea of the minimum support prices, which we need to go and study for this examination. And we do get a lot of questions in prelims from crops that are in the MSP basket. Public distribution system. What are its objectives, functionings, limitations, and revamping? In fact, this public distribution system can be linked with e-technology in the aid of farmers. And how one, there's a lot that one can go ahead and interlink this with. Issues of buffer stock and food security. Technology missions, economics of animal rearing. Now, these, if you see as topics, when you start studying for the examination, you can go ahead and interlink this because technology mission out here, of course, is directly linked with that of e-technology in the aid of farmer, and how you can also think about how technology mission helps in irrigation and irrigation systems out here, and how this technology mission helps in the PDS system in the country. So there's a lot of interlinkages that one can go and have with such topics that is mentioned out here in the syllabus. The next subtopic goes and talks about food processing and related industries in India. What are its scope and significance, the location of it and how it affects FPIs, upstream and downstream requirements, and supply chain management. This is a very important topic. This can go and do a lot of value additions for the farmer if you really think about it. And how food processing and related industries in India can go and link this idea with that of technology missions, and then see how it can go and aid in increasing the income of farmers. The last subtopic in this slide goes and talks about land reforms in India. Of course, land as a topic in itself is very vast and can also be linked with that of governance in India, and land, agricultural land, and the problem of a lot of people who work in farms but are not landowners per se. There's a lot of issues that we face, and also one can go and link it with post consolidation India. So this becomes a very important topic that one needs to study holistically. Now let us look at this slide, and the first subtopic written out here is the effect of liberalization on the economy. This is our economic development section of the topic. What are the changes in industrial policies that we had to face, generally post 1991, and their effects on industrial growth? The second subtopic goes and talks about infrastructure. Of course, the government has a lot of focus on energy, more specifically clean energy, ports for trade, of course, roads for transport and trade, airports for transport and trade, and railways for transport and trade. So these are certain sections that have something that is known as a multiplier effect in the economy. And the development of these can go and give a huge impetus to the growth and development in the country. So I want to study it very carefully. The third subtopic out here goes and talks about investment models. Generally, we get questions on the build, operate, transfer model, and say for instance, we have something called public-private partnership. One should go and study them very carefully. What are the topics? What are the issues that we face from this, and what are the way forward? and what are the advantages of these investment models. The fourth topic goes and talks about effect of liberalization on the Indian economy. As mentioned before, this is basically our 1991 liberalization. What are the pros and what are the cons? So when we get topics on effect of liberalization, there are both positives and negatives. So one should study both of them and also have some sort of a way forward. Changes in industrial policy and their effects on industrial growth. This also has a direct linkage with our erstwhile topic that we talked about, infrastructure. Now, this slide goes and talks about the science and technology aspect of the third paper of general studies. This out here, one can go and see that it goes and mentions science and technology developments and their applications and effects in everyday life. For instance, science and technology, if you go and talk about health, how science and tech helps in health, education, and many more. So these are the things that one generally comes across when we start reading and studying science and technology in for the UPSC examination. Now, the second subtopic out here goes and talks about achievements of Indians in science and technology. There are certain Indians who have contributed immensely in the field of science and technology, not just for India, for the world. So one should go and study what are their achievements and how they have helped the world. Indigenization of technology and developing new technology. Now, this is a buzzword that is out there in the realm of governance because India is trying to go and indigenize a lot of our defense, say for example, defense equipments and all. So this should be studied very carefully. And developing new technology. The third subtopic goes and talks about awareness in the field of information technology, space, computers. Say for instance, we have something called quantum computers that is there. Robotics, of course, nanotechnology. Because these subtopics out here can, if you really think about it, these can go and assist India in, say, for instance, health, agriculture, education, and many more topics. Biotechnology, of course, and issues related to intellectual property right. Because, say, for instance, during the COVID, when we had the COVID-19 pandemic, there were requests by India that said that we should go ahead and waive off the IPR for COVID vaccine. So there have been many issues, debates that go around the IPR regime. So this is something that one should be very thorough. Conservation, environmental pollution and degradation, environmental impact assessment. This falls under the environment and biodiversity section of the main syllabus for general studies paper 3. So one should study this very carefully. This specific topic, by the way, environmental impact assessment, is probably the most important topic that one will be reading for this because out here, this one can go ahead and link it with, say, for instance, environmental pollution and degradation, and also the livelihood of so many people who are impacted with many developmental missions that or developmental projects that the government might have in many vulnerable and delicate places. Disaster and disaster management. This out here as a topic can also be linked with geography if you think about it, that we had seen it in the first paper of the general studies paper 1. So study this very carefully. Also, this idea of disaster management, one can also go ahead and link it with the international relations section of general studies paper 2, because India goes and does a lot of HODR, humanitarian disaster relief in the Indian Ocean and many places around the world whenever there's a disaster that strikes. So one should study it very carefully, like what the NDRF does and many more. So one should study this very, very carefully. Now, this section out here is something that people call internal security colloquially. This is the security aspect of the main syllabus. The first subtopic of the security security goes and talks about linkages between development and spread of extremism. There have been questions that have been asked, say for instance, the effect of left-wing extremism. We have had questions on Naxalism, and many more. And what are the problems and why these things happen? And this is basically the subtopic from which they generally ask questions regarding the same. The third subtopic of this slide, that is the second subtopic of this topic, goes and talks about the role of external state and non-state actors in creating challenges to internal security. The third goes and talks about challenges to internal security through communication networks, say for instance, mobile phones and all. Role of media and social networking sites in internal security challenges, say for instance, Telegram, Facebook, and many more. Basics of cybersecurity, money laundering, and its prevention. So these are very important topics and favorite topics of UPSC. So study them very carefully, of course. The fourth point of internal security goes and talks about security challenges and their management in border areas and the linkages of organized crime with terrorism. So study it very carefully because ours is a very porous border and we have got many neighbors and some neighbors not so friendly with us that pose a lot of challenges to us. So one should go and study them very carefully. Various security forces and agencies and their mandates. Of course, it's a very small topic. Security forces like say the CISF, the BSF, and many other IT, say for instance ITBP, or maybe even the state polices, the National Investigation Agency, the CBI, and many more. So these are few, but not exhaustive subtopics that one can go and study about for this subtopic of various security forces and agencies and their mandate. So that was General Studies Paper 3. Now we go and talk about General Studies Paper 4. Out here, the first subtopic is not really a subtopic per se, it's just a paragraph that goes and talks about what the paper on General Studies 4 that broadly has the topics on ethics, integrity, and aptitude. What are the things that they deal with? And it goes and mentions and rather says that this paper will include questions to test the candidate's attitude and approach to issues related to integrity, probity in public life, and his problem-solving approach to various issues and conflicts faced by him in dealing with society. Questions may utilize the case study approach to determine these aspects. So there is case studies, and we have seen a lot of questions on case studies that they ask. Almost half the paper is based on case studies, so this becomes a very important aspect. The following broad areas will be covered. Ethics and human interface, which goes and talks about the essence, determinants, and consequences of ethics in human actions. Dimensions of ethics, ethics in private and public relationships, human values, and what are the lessons and lives from teaching of great leaders, say, for example, Gandhi and more. Reformers and administrators, role of family, society, and educational institutions in inculcating these values. The second subtopic in the slide goes and talks about attitude. What kind of attitude? What is the content of attitude? What is the structure of attitude? Function of attitude? What does it influence? And what are its relationship with thoughts and behavior? Moral and political attitude, social influence and persuasion. Aptitude and foundational values for civil services, because this is an examination that we are preparing for, right? Integrity, impartiality, and non-partisanship. Objectivity, dedication to public service, empathy, tolerance, and compassion towards the weaker sector, because these are something that is expected from a civil servant, right? So this should be studied very carefully if you are going and preparing for this examination. These are the values that you will have to implement while performing your duty. Emotional intelligence. What is the concept of emotional intelligence? This is very important while dealing with the public in, say, for example, heated situations, and also in our day-to-day life. And what are the utilities and application in administration and governance? Contributors of moral thinkers and philosophers from India, and not just India, and the world. So this is another topic that we need to go and study about. Then we can go up to the next topic, that is public civil service values and ethics in public administration, status and problems. What are the ethical concerns and dilemmas in government and private institutions? Because one needs to go and balance out so many things. One will be facing, and we will be getting questions on case studies where we might have pressure groups that are trying to go and coerce us to do something that might not be legally right but ethically right. So we might have to go and choose something that might be ethically wrong but legally right. So these are questions that we do get case studies of, that we need to go and have a reasoned, balanced approach answer while answering them. What are the laws? What are the rules and regulations? And what is the source of what does conscience do as a source of ethical guidance? What about accountability and ethical governance? What about how we can strengthen the ethical and moral values in governance? What about the ethical issues that people face in international relations and funding? What about corporate governance and how it goes and is very important for the growth of the country? What about probity in governance? Coming back to the another topic, we have to go and study about probity in governance. What are the concepts that we have about public service? What are the philosophical basis of governance and probity? Information sharing and transparency in government. And for this, the most important act is the Right to Information Act. What about the code of ethics that organizations generally have? Code of conduct, citizens charter that one might find outside the notice board of many government and private offices. What about work culture, quality of service delivery, which goes and say, for instance, about corruption as a evil, about time-bound delivery of services by the government, utilization of public funds, and what are the challenges of corruption as mentioned. And from these topics that we just mentioned before, in the fourth paper of the general studies, coming back about ethics, attitude, aptitude, and all more, the slides that we saw, we'll be getting case studies on above issues. So one needs to go and study them very carefully, study them, think about them, and think about the model case studies that we generally get. One can go and refer to previous year questions. And one can think about, or one should also go ahead and think about things that we go and see around with, say, for instance, alleged corruptions going here and there, and how one can go ahead and curb the menace of corruption. Or say, for instance, we do get questions on case studies where we are hypothetically posted as officers of certain departments, be it the police or governance, and then we have to take certain issues. What do we do? So we do get very important questions from here that one needs to tackle with a very good, reasoned, balanced, practical answers. Okay. So this was it. I hope this video gave you some information, some insight about the UPSC Civil Services Examination and how the examination is not everything under the sun. There is a set syllabus, a set pattern in a way that one can go ahead and intelligently derive from the syllabus that is mentioned out there and prepare for the exam accordingly. So thank you for watching this video. All the best for your UPSC Civil Services Examinations journey.
Thank you for learning with Vivas One Educational Foundation. For contents like this, follow us on Facebook and Instagram today.